same thing.
We talked about the quartz. We had a
Quartz, quartz Canadian are different than quartz American. Your quartz 32 ounces, our quart is 40 ounces. But now that we're metric here, we talk about liters, and liters is 35 ounces. So a liter is pretty close to your quart in terms of rate. And we're using the original formulation of Roundup almost on all of our spraying, and we're using it at basically a liter per acre on shielded applications, and of course in the fall applications over top of the trees as well.
But what percentage D is that?
It's 2,4-D 500 amine. That's 500. That's 50%.
Okay.
And that's the amine formulation as opposed to the ester formulation. You can see on the right-hand side, this is a nursery that a major Ontario tree selling company had. They're in a process of abandoning it, and it's going back into potato production. This area, as Fred has already alluded, is one big flat sandy outwash, and the primary crop is potatoes, and there's just as already alluded, there's thousands of acres of potatoes, but that's the crop that we're primarily competing against as far as land, and they can pay what we think is pretty high rates for potato production, especially if they can get pivot irrigation systems on it. They'll pay to $200 to $300 an acre rental per year. Right hand side there.
Do a sand test with the bus right now.
Razor fir that were planted in the spring of 98. Cultivated through last season as the first year planting, and that's what we do. We cultivate.
We're going to drill you for those.
2.5 Fraser fir, and a 4-year-old 2.2 Fraser fir. Right in front of the bus here, you can see the division in the point. This is exactly the same age class, but the stuff in front of it was planted as a 5-year seedling. The stuff from the front of the bus backwards was planted as a 4-year-old seedling. So you can see that there's pretty substantial advantage to the 5-year product. Although when we planted this initially, we did have a survival problem a little bit in the 5-year-old stuff. We had a very droughty summer, and the Fraser right at the end of July started to die right in here. There was specific rows for one reason. There's a row right there that's a replant. We're only nicely getting leader growth on here now, and that's in the 3rd year of growth. So we certainly had some yields more advanced than this for this age class, but.
Hey Paul, you said you're clean cultivated this first year. Do you also have any banned herbicide on there, or banned herbicide around the tree?
Question related to us clean cultivating this the first year. That's always the case. We always clean cultivate for 1 year, and that just seems to, in our opinion, ensure our first year survival, which is really critical to us, and to anybody, of course. But then, yes, there would have been banded herbicide on here, both first, second, and 3rd year.
What are you banding with, Paul?
That's still picking up back here when is that my problem? I'm just too close to my, okay. primary pre-emergent herbicide, usually on first year plantings at about 2.5 pounds of 90 per acre. That's 90% active ingredient simazine. So that's not a very high rate first year. That quite often does not do the job for the season. As a matter of fact, it almost certainly doesn't do the job for the season. And so typically come back in and do post-emergent control with for grasses of either fusilade or one called Excel, or we'll sometimes band spray down the row with gold or gold fusilade mixture, depending upon what the weed composition is. If we have broadleafs like what we have potential in here, because you can see there's all kinds of lamb's quarters and pigweed, primarily in this field lamb's quarters, but that can be looked after by gold if it's hit at the right time of the year. Lundy Farm on your brochure here. This is 8 years old. This field, we're going to stop here, I think. We are stopping here, so you can get out and wander around a bit. But this was mechanically sheared. You'll see our shearing sickle bar shearing system a little bit later. But this was mechanically sheared last year. A liter for that. That's a liter. And that translates into about 7/10 of a cent per tree, based on fir spacing of 5 by 6, ballpark 1,300 trees per acre by the time you get a road structure in there. So it's all based on the same logic of 1,300 trees per acre for 5 by 6 spacing. So when we're doing the spring application of Roundup with our simazine, we're at 20 ounces per acre. That's probably like about 2/10 of a cent per tree cost ultimately. That's in a banding application, okay?
What kind of equipment do you apply that with in the band?
You'll see our herbicide equipment that we are putting down herbicides with. Unfortunately, you're going to see mostly just the shielded sprayer type of equipment. The primary thing that we use for herbicide equipment is a high crop John Deere tractor. It gives a 6-foot clearance, so we can go anything up to about 6.5, 7 feet. And then we have a boom that covers 7 rows at a time, and have drop nozzles that come down and drop in, and we can do 7 rows at a time. So 3 times up and down the field, and we have a section of 20 rows done. And that can cover, quite a bit of ground in a day. And that's what we do almost all of our herbicides with, up to the 6-foot age class. From there on upwards in age class, we have a machine that we call a polybob. You'll see that machine later on today. It can do 3 rows at a time and can get over, depending upon which one it can get over, either 8 or 10 feet high trees. And yeah, just hold on. Graded behind us there, we will be grading it. Again, this is a 9-year-old plantation of Scotch pines. Usually we would have harvested in 9-year-old plantations. We haven't. This is going to be a strip in 1 year. That's ideal from a harvesting point of view. But the normal situation is that we've harvested about 40 or 45% already. Again, the tags, the white twists here, like this, indicates that tree was graded as a number 1 size. If it had a green bar on it down here, that would indicate that's the size. It was at least going to cut out over 7 feet. When we cut out over 7 feet, at least our distinction of size class is that we would give at least 3, maybe 4, depending upon the year, inches on size class on a Scotch pine tree. Okay. Now on a fir tree, we would give usually 6 or 8 inches on the size class. So it's a 6 to 8 foot would be a 6'8" to a 7'8". Okay, is what we use rule of thumb. So this was the number 1 tree in 7 to 8 foot size class. If it had a yellow tag on it, then it would be a premium grade. Now I think our grading corresponds somewhat to perhaps USDA type of grade, although maybe not perfectly. A premium basically should be a tree without fault, 4 sides. It should be a good tree, straight tree, and really not have fault. Or at least anything that would be construed as a major fault. A number 1 grade tree could be faulted or generally less dense. Quite typically when you go into a plantation like this, the grade is all very similar. I mean, there's variation, yes, but it's all very similar. In this grade, primarily, there's a lot of number 1 grade here and a few premiums and a few number 2s. The blue twist,
Cold weather and warm weather. Like we often think of mites coming in
And do
late
some
summer
of
when
this
it's hot and dry.
herbiciding and stuff like that. You make one cure, you do all that. That's what this. That's the field. Trees of this size.
fruit spider mites that we primarily have here historically. And I've had damage on occasion. Like it's something that you got to be out looking for. It doesn't stop you from seeing
Are you people all in pine shoot beetle country? Are you all is that causing your tree to broad?
I'm giving you terms of implementation program. But you get the tree that luxury cultivation shooting spring.
So is it really considered damaging to forest?
here that was evidencing that kind of problem. But even 2 weeks ago when we were in here grading, well, that one must have been 2 weeks ago, but obviously we've got more again right now taking place here.
You've got a few more trees here though. If you come back in 3 weeks, you're going to see
Absolutely.
that one behind there has probably got it.
That one right there has definitely got it. And the next 2 there. So there's quite a few in here actually.
We did that individual
really
for a long time, and it was very effective. But again, we didn't want our guys out there getting exposed to all that new chemicals all the time, and it was labor intensive. So that's when we started looking at August adult spray for moose all winter, hay leaf and everything else.
So that would keep your strawberry root weevil problem down too. You'd be getting
Always basically the same pattern.
It depends on where we're going.
That's when they're out
Scale. Scale.
did not.
And that was a systematic every year thing in that case.
On an annual basis, but really I would say after the trees got to 2 to 3 years before harvest, get it, because it takes a 2 to 3 year cycle to build up and give you any kind of problem.
To give you mortality.
A younger tree where you still have good spread or application, it's still been going good.
We decided this year, probably in error, not to do our Simazine and Roundup cleanup in the spring. That was a mistake. We have done our shielded spraying since that time, just here back about 3 weeks or a month ago. So this is balsam in H class 8. You see some variability to what we have there. This area had 600 pounds of 14.7, 14.345 fertilizer on it. That gives you about 100 pounds of nitrogen. That would be in the form of ammonium nitrate. That was put on back in probably May, and that's we certainly promoted some wheat growth, as you can tell here, having 9% on that. Well, if you look to the left here on the other side, then we have this is a division between Fraser and Balsam here. This is Fraser to the left. Okay, I guess now we're into Fraser on both sides, right? And we've had an interesting phenomenon in here. If you look to the left carefully, you can see some of the Fraser that look sort of balsamish, and they have longer needles and flatter needle configuration on the branch, and they have tended to be about the biggest and in fact the nicest looking trees in the patch. There, I think that's second one in back there, third row in. This came out of all of our own seed beds. We had bought the seed as Fraser. There just seems to be variability to the nature of the seed, and some of those big ones are the non-bracted types of cones. I'm not sure if anybody else has any comments about Fraser, whether they've noticed the variability there or had balsam looking Fraser, but we definitely think we have some balsam looking Fraser amongst the...
What nursery did they come from?
They came out of our own beds,
I see.
our own stuff, and we bought the seed as Fraser.
There was no chance of any mixture getting in there or anything like that?
We don't think so. We don't think so, but now this has been sheared. This is 8-year-old material. This is being sheared both to stay and to go. In other words, our procedure is to go in and tag the trees, not tag the trees, but put a dab of paint on the trees that we want to go that year, and then we shear them appropriately for that, or if we want them to stay the year, we'll shear them tighter. Now you can see some of the leaders on the shorter stuff in here is quite held back, and that's to fill out the tops of trees that have grown. We've stretched this plantation a bit in terms of its growth. Looking down the rows here, the shielded spray, which again was probably too late in the season, but has controlled a good number of stuff in between the trees. The question was Stinger registered in Canada? Stinger's not, but a Montrell is. Same thing. Is actually a year older, believe it or not. We're into 9-year-old stuff now. The first year that we planted this, we had a fairly severe drought and we irrigated, but those trees, because of weed pressure initially and because of the drought of the first year, really have fallen behind and are no farther advanced than the 8-year-old stuff that was not in a drought year and who had better weed control. But you can see there's some nice looking trees here too.
You don't see any seed cones on it.
We were fortunate this year. We had a very low cone crop this year. That's because we had moisture adequately through the bud formation season last year. But we have typically, we did go through here to pick cones. Not that we had many to pick, but sometimes if we have a dry year during the bud formation time, then you'll get heavy cone production. It'll be like a major job picking cones. I think the north end of the farm was pruned last year with the machine, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's correct. The north end of the farm was pruned by machine last year, whereas these have been pruned by hand both this year and last year.
And I use that all the time. Anytime a bus comes in or a group of people come by, I use that line, and it always brings a smile. And it's a great way to start off for a Christmas tree grower to start off the talk at any time. If I speak to a Rotary Club or anything like that, and we always take every opportunity we can to promote our business. So if we're asked to go and speak someplace, to the Women's Institute or a Rotary Club or anything of that nature, we're quick to take advantage of that. Because publicity is everything for a business that's anyone in the choose and cut business. Publicity is everything. And we're in the choose and cut business, as you'll find out in a few minutes. I'd like to start off though by giving you a little bit of the history of our farm. It started way back in 1926. My father was 19 years old. He was an only child, and his mother and dad both passed away within 6 months of each other. His mother died of cancer, and his dad had a heart attack. So here he is, 19 years old, all on his own. His uncles thought, geez, Reg, I don't think you're going to be a farmer like your dad was. Maybe we should have an auction sale and sell everything. So that's what they did. They sold all the livestock, all the equipment, and the farm too. And they handed my dad what seemed to be, to him at the time, an astronomical amount of money. 19 years old, all this money, and cars had just sort of come on the horizon. He started buying cars, and he ran through about 3 really fancy cars in about 3 years. And he realized that his money was almost gone. He was getting an education to become a teacher, but his money was gone. He decided to take the last remaining inheritance and plant trees. So he bought 2 properties back in the 20s and reforested them with mostly with red pine, some white pine, and some spruce. Bucket mixtures. You wouldn't believe how they planted them in the field. But there was some Scotch pine, but it was all mixed up like a dog's breakfast. But at least it was planted. He went away and was a teacher, a shop teacher in the city of Toronto, and kept thinking about trees and went back up and looked at these 2 properties from time to time, but nothing much happened there. He did cut a few white spruce for Christmas trees. That was really the only income he had out of those 2 properties in those early days, and then of course they were just wild, unpruned trees. But he had the idea back in at that time that maybe you could grow trees in rows as a farmer grows corn and have these as a crop. And he thought that when the Second World War was on, gas rationing was a big thing, and Christmas trees couldn't travel very far because there just wasn't the gasoline to transport trees long distances. Up until the Second World War, the Christmas trees in metropolitan area like Toronto came primarily from northern Ontario, and they were all wild. So my dad thought maybe we'd buy a property down in this area and grow trees on it and see what we could do about selling them as a crop. And he thought Scotch pine would be a good tree to work with. He wasn't, he was the only one doing this at that time in Ontario here. But there were several people in the United States who were also doing some investigative work. And the person who was the most helpful and he worked with the closest was a professor at Cornell University named Joshua Cope. And Joshua Cope and my dad used to write letters back and forth saying, I did this and this happened and I did that and that happened. They really had no idea how to prune these trees. They were using hand clippers and they were using different, trying to figure out the timing. The timing was everything, as you know, in pruning Scotch pine. And it took them about 3 years before they really got it figured out. And the climate in the Cornell area is not all that different than here. So the timing was just about the same for both places. My dad bought his first Christmas tree farm in 1945, and it was in a desolate area back in the middle of nowhere. And I remember I was about 12, planting trees with my dad on that property. And we heard this banging and crashing. And we said, what on earth is that? So we went over and here comes a bulldozer across our property pushing over trees. So the guy turned the key off and my dad sort of, he wasn't really upset, but he kind of, he was certainly wanted to find out what this is all about. So I asked the guy what he's doing. He says, I'm building a highway. He said, you're building a highway? He says, actually, I'm clearing a line of sight for a survey. If you look down this path I just did, you could see a transit set up down there. And that was the first we knew that Highway 400 that you came up on was going through our property. So we had a property over in that area, and the highway came through. We had bought it about 2 years before. It took 11 acres off the property. It didn't need actually 11 acres for the road itself, but there's a tiny bit on the other side that was going to be useless, so they insisted that it be transferred to the owner on the other side. And they paid my dad enough for that 11 acres that he got the rest of the farm for nothing. So that was his first real exciting moment in the Christmas tree business. He planted Scotch pine there, and we did prune them. The next thing that happened of any consequence was a man came knocking on the door one day. And you came through the Holland Marsh if you came up to 400. This is a vegetable growing area that's of some significance. It's about 25,000 acres. Grows a lot of celery and lettuce and carrots and onions and this sort of thing. And one of the biggest growers in that area is a chap named Peter Verkuyk. Nearly all Dutch families that came into that area. And Peter came and knocked on the door. He said, gee, you've got some nice Christmas trees there. And he said, are any of them for sale? And my dad said, well, they're all for sale. You know, the Christmas tree growers will sell anything. And Peter said, well, he said, I don't really want to be in the tree business. But he said, I'm selling my onions and carrots and celery and lettuce to the Kroger company in Cincinnati, Ohio. And they said, Peter, you're up there in Canada, and we need Christmas trees, and I understand they have trees up in Canada. Why don't you find me trees? And Peter said, well, I really don't want to do that. And they said, if you don't really want to do that, we don't really want to buy your onions and carrots. And so he said, I've really got to find something. So we shipped a carload. Everything was shipped in railway cars in those days. We loaded a carload, basically almost unpruned by today's standards, and certainly not baled. And it was a lot of work. And we had to rob the next year's cut a little bit to get 1,000 trees to fill the boxcar. And lo and behold, Kroger's loved these trees. They said, Peter, that's exactly what we want. we're gonna need 10 carloads for next year. And Peter said, what are we gonna do? You know, we didn't have 10 carloads, we didn't have even a carload ourselves. So Peter said, by this time there was a group of growers that had established an early association here in Ontario, and my dad was the first secretary of that association, so he knew who these people were. And Peter, I was 18, Peter said, Dad, why don't you go out on the road and buy trees for me? So I went out and tagged trees and bought trees, and Peter wrote the checks, and he looked after all the harvesting and loading the cars and everything. But because I was going to university then, but I worked with Peter for a long time, and the volume was mostly around 10,000 trees a year. We just did that for probably 10 years. And I got to know a lot of growers real well in that period, and saw different things that they were doing. And I was anxious for my dad to expand our operation a little bit. Through my dad, I became interested in trees and went into forestry at the university, and had summer jobs there that took me all over the place, looking at land and working for different conservation agencies and things like that. I got to see quite a lot. So I was really anxious for my dad to expand the operation, and we found a property, it was 119 acres, and we subsequently added to it, bringing it up to 145. But it was our second acquisition, and my dad didn't really want to buy it. He was quite comfortable with the level of operations which we had. He had lots of free time to do other things, and he didn't know that he wanted to tie himself up that much. He certainly didn't like the idea of having a mortgage. We had to have the property cost $5,000, and we had a mortgage for $3,500. We were paying off $500 a year on this property. It turned out to be a pretty good investment, actually. There's a lot of houses getting close to it now. We still have that property. So we started planting that. A couple of classmates from the university started working with us, and Bob Staley, a really good friend of mine, we should be in the Guinness Book of Records because the two of us planted 17,000 trees in one day with a rented machine. That's why it was all in one day, because you only had the machine for the one day. And we started at 5 in the morning, and it wasn't hardly light then. And we finished, it was certainly dark when we finished. And we hardly spoke to each other after 5 o'clock. We were both in bad shape by the end of that day. But we've talked about it a lot since. We expanded again, and that purchase was about 1951. I graduated in 55. Went to work with the Ontario government in the forestry department there, and we bought another property in 1958 that was already planted with trees by a doctor. The trees were all about 3 feet tall, and they had been looked after. But he passed away, and his wife wanted to get rid of this property, so we were lucky enough to find that property and bought that. And immediately began pruning that one as well. And then this farm here came about first purchase here came about 1960. Now we've added, over the years, we don't go looking for land to buy, but over the years we've added different properties. So where we are now is up to 400 acres in essentially this locality. There's about 100 acres across the road, about 300 acres on this side of the road. With all of those things, our property holdings now are up to about 1,000 acres that we own. And we have about 500 acres that are leased or rented under different arrangements. And believe me, there are many different arrangements. We have everything from total, we pay so much a year rent, to several joint venture situations where they provide the land and we provide the seedlings and the know-how and the work, and then we share in the harvesting decisions are totally ours, but when we harvest, we pay so much a tree as a Christmas tree, and so much a tree as a landscape tree. Along the way, Joan and I had 3 kids, and the kids grew and came to an age where they could help us more and more. And this is my son Doug, who really runs this farm now. And we have 2 daughters as well. The girls were pruners too, and have helped us all through the years. My dad, being a shop teacher, didn't like the idea of having girls in the pruning crew. He thought there's going to be love affairs going on out there, and how are they going to go to the bathroom, and all of these kinds of things really were bothering my dad. And I said, I've got 2 girls, they both want to work, and I think they do a good job. And so when the girls were young teenagers, we started having girls in our pruning crew. With my dad's shock, the girls were better than the boys. We couldn't believe this. We really had some super pruners among these girls. And we've always had girls ever since, of course, and they do a good job. The Christmas Tree Growers Association here in Ontario is operated under several different names. It started off as a cooperative, Ontario Christmas Tree Growers Cooperative. Then they hired a manager, full-time manager. This guy was a promoter like you wouldn't believe. He was really the wrong man for this job. He was selling people seedlings, and you can remember back in the 50s the number of the trees that were being planted. Thousands of acres of Scotch pine being planted. And this man, Robert Jones, he was in the forefront, driving around in a Rolls Royce, telling people, here's the way to make your fortune, you know. And it didn't matter what kind of land you had, it was perfect, you know, just absolutely perfect. And so he ran this thing into a big mess, and it looked like all the directors were going to get sued and this kind of thing. So they changed the name from Ontario Christmas Tree Growers Cooperative to the Yule Tree Farmers of Ontario. They thought this was getting enough of a change, and it was a complete new constitution and everything else. So they operated with that for a while. Then they said, Yule Tree, this is not a good name. So they eventually changed it to Ontario Christmas Tree Growers Association. And then a few years ago, I'm not sure when it was, Doug was president about 10 years ago, thereabouts, and the name got changed to Christmas Tree Farmers Association. I think this has also been a really good move. We have to keep as close an alliance as we possibly can to agriculture. The tax advantages are tremendous, municipal tax-wise especially. Forest land gets a wee bit of a break from time to time, but it's not anything like the regular break that the farmers get on land that they till. So we've been riding on that coattail, and it's helped us quite a lot. Our municipal taxes are high, but because you're a farm, you're only taxed at 25%. It would be if it was just vacant land. Now this also puts a lot of pressure on people to use the land for something that's going to give them that tax break. So there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how they can get in on that. And that's part of the reason why people have come to us and said, would you consider growing trees on our property? We've been fairly selective in which properties we've done that on. So we've tried to pick properties that are in this immediate locality where we can drive the tractors from farm to farm. Although that's getting to be more of a problem too with the increased amount of traffic. we're fortunate in this locality. We're in the fastest growing area of Canada, and the city of Barrie is growing at such a rate right now that the city fathers really don't know how many people are living there. They issued so far this year they've issued 2,500 building permits for houses. Last year was over 2,000. So they've been humping along at about 1,500 to 2,500 houses a year. And what was maybe 25,000 people 10 years ago is well over 100,000 now. It's possible. I think it's closer to 120 than it is anything else. Most of these people are commuters to Toronto. The 400 highway is just a zoo on early in the morning and coming home at night. Back in the 50s, I thought maybe we should operate choose and cut as well as the wholesale business we've been doing all along. The wholesale business we've been shipping through Peter to the Kroger company and then to others as well. We began shipping from New York City. For 30 years we shipped 70% of what we produced to the United States. Mostly into the Atlantic seaboard around New York City. It's lots of interesting stories. We had the truck that was running back and forth to one customer in Manhattan. And he'd taken about 3 loads down. He'd go down one day and back the next. Load him again, away he goes. Finally the trucker said, "You better phone that guy down there. He's not very happy." I said, "He's not very happy. These are good trees we're shipping down there. What's the problem?" He said, "Well," he said, "he's putting these trees in an alleyway. He's up to the fourth floor in this alleyway, and he has no more room to go." So I talked to them. This man was a great guy, really. And he said, "You got to slow down." He said, "I'm moving these trees out to others, but this is his holding area in the alley." And he slept at the end of the alley. He had a little trailer parked there. The guard is tricky, so he was sitting there guarding them. But back in the 50s, the idea of the choose and cut was sort of coming along with several growers in the Ontario Association. My dad was always active in that association. We're talking about choose and cut. And some people had tried this down in the States and it seemed to work pretty good. My dad didn't want to do it. He said, "No, we've got enough to do now with the wholesale business. It's nice to pack up and relax a little bit." And so we didn't do it right quick. But there was another grower who we were very close to who did try it. And he put some ads in the paper and got something on the radio. And he was a really good person in terms of getting his message out to the public. So he was operating his very first weekend. I said to my dad, "Let's go take a run out and see how Keith Horton's, if anybody showed up at his place." Well, we couldn't get within a mile of his place. The cars were everywhere. And we were in operation the next week. And we've been in the choose and cut business ever since that time. And the farm that we bought, the $5,000 farm, was in a great location for choose and cut. Still is. And we operated that location as our first choose and cut location. And we had huge numbers of people come to that location, cars all over the place. And I thought, "Gee, this is great. You know, look at we're going to do all these trees this way, and we've got this great location. The world is perfect." What I didn't realize was all our neighbors were watching this, and the competition which we have down there is totally fierce. There's a freeway that runs north, not too far from that farm. And